The sun was sinking behind the jagged mountains of the frontier, painting the endless sky in streaks of crimson and gold, and the lonely rancher, Jacob Thornton, stood by the corral fence with his weathered hat pulled low, staring at the cattle that grazed lazily, as if the world carried no burdens, while he, a man hardened by years of silence and solitude, bore on his shoulders the weight of ghosts no one else could see, for he had lost his family to fever long ago, leaving him with only the wide prairie and the stubborn earth that needed breaking, until every night his cabin walls echoed only with the creak of old timber and the whisper of wind across the plains. But this evening, as twilight deepened, a sound unlike any he had known before drifted faintly across the dusty trail, leading toward his property, a sound muffled yet desperate. And when he narrowed his eyes, he saw a burlap sack, torn and dusty, lying strangely in the dirt road as though someone had dropped it in haste. And at first he thought perhaps it was grain spilled from a wagon. Yet when he drew closer, boots crunching gravel, he heard it, faint but chilling, a woman's voice from inside the sack, ragged and broken, gasping, "Please, open it. I can't breathe." And Jacob froze in place, every instinct screaming to turn back. For no good ever came from mystery on the frontier. But his calloused hands trembled as he knelt and pressed his ear closer, hearing the shallow, rattling breaths of someone truly suffocating, someone buried alive in rough canvas. And his heart hammered with the force of both fear and duty, for he was a man who had sworn never again to entangle himself with others. Misery after burying his wife and child. Yet here was life begging him, clawing against death itself. So with one sharp tug, he loosened the twine around the sack's mouth, and as dust scattered into the air, he lifted the coarse flap, and what he saw inside rooted him to the spot, unable to breathe himself. For within the sack was not simply a woman, though her bruised face and wild, terrified eyes burned into his soul, but also the small, fragile forms of two, children clinging desperately to her, their lips cracked, their skin pale from lack of air, their eyes filled with the innocent panic of the defenseless. And Jacob stumbled backward, his mind struggling to comprehend, who would bind a mother and her children like livestock and abandon them to suffocate beneath the setting sun. And though the woman gasped for air, clutching her little ones with protective arms, she met his gaze with a plea so raw it stripped him of all resolve. And Jacob, the man who had vowed never to love or care again, felt the stirrings of a battle raging in his chest. For fate had just delivered into his hands a secret darker than the desert night, a story yet untold, and he knew with bone-deep certainty that opening that sack had changed everything, that the life of a lonely rancher had ended and a far more dangerous journey was only beginning. And friends, if you feel the weight of Jacob's choice, if you want to ride further into this storm of secrets and destiny, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the rest of this powerful tale. Because the journey of "Please open it, I can't breathe" has only just begun, and what comes next will freeze your blood and stir your heart in ways you'll never forget. Jacob's breath came shallow as he staggered back from the burlap sack, the cries of the children mingling with the rasp of the mother, who now clutched at freedom with shaking fingers. And in that terrible moment he realized that by loosening that rope and lifting that flap, he had not just freed a stranger, he had pried open the jaws of fate itself, a fate that would swallow him whole if he faltered. Yet the weight of humanity in those eyes left him no choice. So he reached down with trembling but steady hands, pulling the woman upright, brushing straw and dust from her tangled dark hair while her children clung like frightened sparrows, coughing from their confinement. And he murmured words he had not spoken in years, words of comfort he thought long buried. "You're safe now. Breathe, just breathe." Though in truth his own chest felt heavy, for every question stormed his mind at once. Who had done this? Why abandon them in such cruelty? What danger had now followed them onto his land? And the woman, after a long, desperate gasp, managed to whisper her name. "Elena." Her voice cracked but filled with desperate dignity. Then, pointing weakly toward the horizon where the last ember of sunlight faded, she choked out, "They'll come back. Please don't let them take my children." And Jacob's blood froze, for in those few words lay the shadow of pursuit, of men who dealt in fear and violence. And though he had lived years as a recluse, hardened by loss, There awoke in him the old instinct of a protector, the part of him that had once fought off raiders, mended fences under fire, and defended his homestead with unflinching steel. So he guided Elena and the little ones toward his cabin, every step heavy with the knowledge that unseen eyes could already be watching. And once inside, he set them near the hearth, giving water to the children, wrapping a blanket around the trembling mother, while outside the coyotes howled like harbingers of the coming storm. And slowly, painfully, Elena began to speak, telling of men who called themselves bounty riders, but in truth were no more than wolves, smugglers who had taken her husband's life and tried to sell her family as property. And when she resisted, they beat her and stuffed her and the children into that sack to die on the lonely trail. And Jacob's fists clenched with a fury he thought he had buried with his family, because this was the kind of cruelty that the West bred in its darkest corners, cruelty that thrived when good men turned their backs. And he knew now that he could not be one of those men, not anymore, for destiny had dragged him back into the fray. So as the firelight flickered against the rough-hewn walls of his cabin, he looked upon Elena and the children, her daughter with tear-streaked cheeks, her boy clutching a wooden toy carved crudely but lovingly, relic of a father gone. And Jacob felt the old emptiness in his heart shifting, filling with a dangerous purpose, for he would not allow this family to be hunted like prey, no matter the cost. And when the first echo of hooves rumbled faintly across the distant plains, he knew the wolves were already near, the bounty riders returning to finish what they had begun. And Jacob, once a man resigned to solitude, now stood at the threshold of war, his rifle gleaming in the firelight, his spirit ignited with a fire fiercer than grief. And as he whispered to Elena, "They'll have to kill me before they lay a hand on you or your young ones," he understood that his life was no longer his own, that the rancher who once froze at the sight of a sack now stood ready to defy death itself. Because sometimes fate leaves you no choice but to fight. And friends, if you want to ride with Jacob into this storm, to witness how a lonely rancher's heart transforms into an unbreakable shield against evil, then subscribe to the channel, for the next chapter of this story will grip your soul tighter than any rope, reminding you that in the Wild West, courage is not chosen, it is demanded by destiny.